What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. Now we're going to look at a BBC programme called This Week. It's the final show after 16 years. Now I trawled through this boring 1 hour and 10 minute show to find the best bits of it. So on the panel with host Andrew Neil was Micheal Portillo, Alan Johnson, Miranda Green and Piers Morgan. Diane Abbott was due to attend, but she refused to show up, causing Andrew Neil to say this.
You will understand why I've moved down here. It's safer than sitting up here. Now, at this stage, I wanted to speak to Diane Abbott. We thought she was, or as they say in Dead Ringers, Diane Abbott! We thought she was coming down. I wanted to ask her if she was preparing for government, and then to ask her of which country. But she's not here, so we can't do that at all. But
now, since she didn't show up, we're going to focus on the Brexit segment and the Labour Party. Let's get into it.
I mean, you don't get that level of sophisticated analysis on Newsnight, do you? Well, let's be honest, I mean, that's probably why it's still on air. Michael, has Brexit broken British politics?
I don't think we know yet. I think if Brexit is delivered by the end of this year, then probably not. I think if Brexit is delivered by the end of this year, then the Conservative Party probably survives. It fights a general election, it has shot the fox of the Brexit Party, and I would think that Boris Johnson would be able to defeat Jeremy Corbyn. And by the way, I agree with what Alan said earlier, that the way this will happen is actually that a deal almost identical to Mrs May will be pulled out of the drawer and passed. But I think if the Conservative Party does not deliver Brexit by the end of the year, then I don't know how it will stay in power. We slide towards a general election, and both main parties will be massacred by Brexit.
Well, that's the interesting point, Alan, isn't it? Because if Brexit is not delivered in some shape or form, or at least resolved in some way, it could produce a realignment in British politics, couldn't it?
It could, and in a sense it already is producing a realignment in British politics. But my view is that if there's not this deal by this year, then the whole game changes. I supported Remain. I led the Labour Party campaign to Remain, which is probably why we lost.
Yeah. Great job you did, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Leave.
But I believe that referendum result should be honoured. Now, that gets to the stage where if you spent 2 years trying to negotiate it and you're getting nowhere, and Johnson can't get anywhere as the new Prime Minister, you're then into a scenario where if it's dropping out without a deal, I'm for remaining. I think the whole ball game changes then, and you'll get people then going back, people who were keen to see the deal done and keen to honour the result of that referendum, thinking, well, crashing out without a deal was never part of this. And I think that then makes the situation far, far worse.
So Andrew Neil asks if Brexit has broken British politics. My answer to this is no, Brexit did not do it. The politicians who have ignored the will of the people have broken British politics, and what little trust the UK population had in them. Micheal Portillo answers, if Brexit is delivered this year, the Tory party will survive. If not, they are done for, which is something I've been saying for a while. Micheal also points out another thing I have been saying. The most likely thing that will happen regarding Brexit is Boris will put through a rehashed MayBot deal to get Brexit done and beat Commissar Corbynov in the next election, therefore saving the Tory party. I said it yesterday, the only way for us to get a true Brexit now is a general election with a no-deal manifesto from one of the parties. Either the Brexit party or the Conservative party are probably the most likely to do that. Will it happen? Or when will it happen? Who knows? Andrew Neil then points out if Brexit is not done, it will cause a realignment of British politics, which in a way has already happened with the Brexit party's rise. One of the leaders of the Remain campaign, Alan Johnson, even admits we need to get Brexit done, but then goes back to his undemocratic stance when Brexit does not involve us becoming the vassal state of Europe. More proof that if you are in the media or politics and voted Remain, you can never be a Brexiteer. He claims crashing out without a deal was never part of this. That is because MayBot never once said to the EU that we will leave without a deal. It was part of it to the people who voted Brexit though, but for Remainers, it ain't. So the May deal is loved by Remainers because it essentially keeps us in the EU. We do have to remember that. But let's move on.
Election result. In England, it saw the return of two-party politics. Labour and the Conservatives between them got about 85% of the vote. They hadn't had that share for a generation. You look at the polls now, because of Brexit, between them they can barely get 40% of the vote. It has shaken up British politics, the major institutions, in a way that nothing has in recent times.
It's become very tribal. I mean, it's interesting what Michael said there about it will never go back because of social media, predominantly, I think. Someone said a great thing the other day to me, which I thought was very insightful about where we are both in Britain and America, and indeed other countries, which is we've basically regressed back 2,000 years to when we were living in tribes. And you lived in your tribe and you used to all dress the same and you'd have the same ear piercings and you'd do the same things, you have the same attitudes, the same people you talk to day in, day out. And it never deviated. And then eventually we moved out of our tribes and we met other tribes. And they dressed differently and they spoke differently, they had different opinions. And we concluded in our tribe that the only answer to this was to kill the other tribe. And 2,000 years later, we're back in the tribes, aren't we? On social media, it's not really about what's good for the country, it's just about being proven right. I mean, if you look at Alistair Campbell for 10 minutes on Twitter, it's the self-righteousness of he just has to be proven right, even if it's not right. And I think it's the same in America with Trump, and you're either for it or against it completely implacably. And so normal democratic debate and discourse is disappearing. And that, to me, is the most dangerous thing about all this. We've got to get back to a position where we can sit across each other, vehemently disagree, but actually respect each other's right to have a different opinion. And if we don't, politics and democracy will basically just implode.
Can we go back to normal?
Andrew Neil points out the complete disaster that is the Labour and Conservative polling numbers right now. After having 80% of the vote before Brexit, they now can't even manage 40%. Piers talks about democratic discourse dying, which I would agree with, because the media and politicians blatantly disregard democracy and ignore the will of the people. This is what makes public discourse tribal. 3 years of delays, lies and betrayals by these political shitweasels and the fuckpigs who make up the media is going to create some animosity, don't you think? Piers talks about allowing people to have different opinions, which of course you should, but when it comes to Brexit, which is the topic of discussion and one of the causes behind these divisions, it's not about opinion. The country voted to leave, opinion is now irrelevant. Honouring the referendum is the only fact that matters. We should be long past opinions. Now let's check out the next clip.
I think we now have a left and a right in this country, more like European politics, and putting all those people from the left and the right back into the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, I think it's going to be almost impossible. I understand what Michael says, that if you get Brexit through, you disable Nigel Farage, but I think you've still got a right wing now in the UK, which is sort of empowered, and that does worry me.
I mean, if Labour becomes the party of Remain, doesn't that bust or burst the Lib Dems bubble?
It could do, but the Labour Party are very, very late to the party on this.
And they've not quite made it.
They've not quite made it yet, exactly. They're still sort of on the doorstep.
A lot of Labour voters want to Brexit. I mean, let's not forget that. So this idea that Labour can suddenly, having repeatedly promised to deliver the result of the referendum, before we even try to do that, they pivot back to saying, actually, we're going to stop it happening. I think you'd have a huge, particularly in the north of England, you would have a huge reaction.
That will be a realignment. You would get then, as Labour becomes more the party of the metropolitan areas and of the white-collar class.
But that's the end of the Labour Party as we know it, isn't it?
Sure, it's a different Labour Party.
If the Labour Party gives up on its heartland in the north, it's not the Labour Party anymore, I don't think.
Liverpool voted to remain.
Yes.
Leeds voted to remain. Manchester voted to remain.
But these are the metropolitan areas.
Yes, that's true, but you see
the smaller
you see the
towns
same in
areas.
the south, the metropolitan areas compared to rural areas.
There are vast swathes of the north that voted Brexit who are Labour voters. I think there would be a massive reaction to any attempt by the Labour Party to now pretend this referendum never happened.
On this last ever programme, may I disagree with Miranda for possibly the first time? I don't think that we've moved to the right and the left. I think there is an asymmetry in the politics. The Labour Party has clearly, under Jeremy Corbyn, moved to the left, although there's massive discontent in the parliamentary Labour Party about that movement. In the Conservative Party, the hardline Brexiteers are described as right-wing. There's no particular reason why they should be thought of as right-wing. It's not a particularly right-wing position. But otherwise, I don't see any evidence of the right in politics. I don't see any right-wing economic policies in the Conservative Party. I actually see lots of centrist and even quite socialist social policies in the Conservative Party. And that's why I think the Conservative Party has more of a chance of bouncing back than you might think, because actually it hasn't set off to the far right. Brexit is an exception amongst its positions rather than an indicator of its general disposition.
So Andrew Neil asked, if the Labour Party becomes the party of Remain, does it burst the Lib Dems bubble? Yes, it does. But it wouldn't be a good idea still. Piers Morgan points out that a lot of Labour voters actually voted to leave the EU, and how devastating that could be up in the north of England. The Labour MP tries to defend it, saying a few northern cities voted to remain, but we know that Labour's core vote is in the towns and villages up in the north, not in the cities. Let's hope they go full Remain and destroy any chance the Marxist Labour Party has of being elected anytime soon, by trying to pretend this referendum never happened. Michael points out how far left the Labour Party is going under Commissar Corbynov, before shitting on the notion that Brexiteers are right wing. The BBC editors must have hated that, because they call everyone who votes Brexit racist and fascist right-wingers, or far-right, innit? Now let's move on to Maybot's time in office.
Did the Maybot achieve anything in her 3 years in Downing Street?
Absolutely nothing. I mean, I don't say that lightly. I think she was the worst Prime Minister we've ever had. And her speech,
worse than Lord North. He lost the colonies.
I think she was a disaster, because the moment she got it, I mean, it was always a disaster to me that the Prime Minister charged with delivering Brexit was a Remainer, and that Parliament was three-quarters Remain. So immediately, there's the problem. I don't think Theresa May's heart's ever been in this. I think she's a terrible negotiator. I think the fact we weren't planning properly for no deal was a catastrophic negotiating mistake. In any big business deal, the one thing you plan for was walking away. We now know from the EU yesterday that actually we never even indicated to them.
Michel Barnier said that.
Absolutely astonishing that the guys running the negotiating table for the EU said we never even raised the spectre of walking away. I mean, what kind of negotiation has been going on here?
And just to remind people, Piers, I'm pretty sure you voted Remain, didn't you?
I voted Remain.
And yet you make this point.
Well, I share Alan's view of this, which is I voted Remain. But if you vote in a general election, you vote for a government, and we were talking about this earlier, every party in every election tells whoppers, which they don't deliver, right? This idea that suddenly everything has to be sacrosanct and held, that's not how the reality works. But we have an option. If a government fails to deliver on its promises, and it fails generally, then we kick them out and we try somebody else. We haven't even tried Brexit. And my argument, if I was a Brexit voter, I'd be like, well, you've got to at least try. You can't just, as the Labour Party now indicating, just simply put your fingers in your ears and say this never happened.
Did she achieve anything in 3 years in Downing Street?
No, it's been extremely disappointing, to say the least. And I thought her final speech, where she sort of tried to say that she was very worried about the state of politics when she's been in charge for 3 years, was really, really, really pushing it, actually.
First bit of self-awareness from the Prime Minister in a long time.
Stunning lack of self.
So the host Andrew Neil asked, did the Maybot achieve anything during her 3 years in office? Which we all know the answer to that is no. Piers rightly points out she will go down as the worst Prime Minister in British history. The depths of her incompetence know no bounds and will likely never be surpassed. She went into the Brexit negotiations without the option to walk away, which we all knew months ago, but has since been recently confirmed by the EU and the Chancellor Philip Hammond, who has admitted he told businesses not to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. And as Piers points out, the EU admitted that Theresa May did not even talk about no deal once. It was pure insanity that a Ramonin fuckpig like Theresa the EU appeaser was in charge of Brexit. You can see when Piers Morgan talks about making sure Brexit happens, even though he is a Remain voter, the salty cumbucket Miranda Green cannot hide her disgust. She wants another referendum because it's not democratic for her to lose and not get her own way, obviously. Now let's move on to Commissar Corbynov.
All right, well, she's going. We'll be gone in about a week's time. Jezza the Red is still there. Is it all but over for Jezza the Red?
Oh, I think we've passed peak Corbyn. We've well past peak Corbyn. Actually, I think that result in 2017, a lot of Labour supporters thought we were for Remain, which explains why we did so well in many of those areas. But they were soon came to see that Jeremy's not changed his mind on anything since he was about 15. So he hasn't got that. So this is. It's actually a serious point. He looks at events and sort of puts them into his rigid thought pattern that's very ideological. He doesn't look at events and have the flexibility to kind of wrap around what should happen next. So he's in a total state of disarray. We're talking about what line should he take on Brexit. I mean, Jeremy, just is incapable of that kind of leadership. I think we passed Pete Corbyn. So I think, being led by the Islington correspondent of the Morning Star has not done as much good. But I think the cult that he represents is still there, and it's still out to deselect Labour MPs that don't agree with them, and it's still fighting its old, Stalinist battles internally. So I hate to be pessimistic. I can't see any end to this soon.
We think we know who the next Tory leader will be, and therefore the next Prime Minister. Who should the next Labour leader be?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because at the moment, Boris Johnson, despite all the noise around him, the fact he's getting all the noise will help it. This country wants someone to bring this Brexit to a resolution, somehow. I think most people do, outside of the Westminster bubble. They want this done. Boris has got a good chance, for the reasons Michael laid out, I think, to actually get a pretty similar version to Theresa May deal through, in which case he'll be a hero. And if he can convert the optimism around actually getting it done into other stuff, bringing police back to the streets and all the hot button things that he's hit.
But who should the next Labour leader be?
But here's the interesting point. Well, here's my point.
I know who the next Tory leader is.
Eventually coming to the answer to your question, which is this. If it doesn't work the way Michael says, and he can't get a deal done, then he tries for no deal. That's going to get blocked by Parliament. He has to go for a general election, presumably. And at that stage, the real question for the Labour Party is, if Corbyn's still in power, I think Boris wipes the floor with him. If by then the Labour Party have managed to get rid of Corbyn, and they bring in a Keir Starmer, they bring in somebody like that, a Tom Watson, somebody who's just a little bit more reasonable, and a little bit more electable, then it gets, I think, very interesting in that election, particularly if Boris is by then seen to have failed to deliver Brexit as he promised.
Let me just go around very quickly in our final minute in this segment. Will Brexit in some way have happened by the end of this year, Michael?
I believe it will.
Alan?
Yes, I believe it will.
Miranda?
Yes.
No.
3-1. 3-1. There we go.
The panel discussed whether it's over for Commissar Corbynov. Given the shitstorm that surrounds him in the Labour Party, I would say it is. I will admit I had to laugh the first time I heard Alan say, "We have passed Pete Corbyn," pointing out that the Commissar has not changed his views since he was about 15. Now, of course he hasn't. They're entrenched into his very ideology, so how could he really change them? Alan then says being led by the Islington correspondent of the Morning Star is not good. This cunt is not pulling his punches. Like sharks, the Labour Party MPs can smell blood in the water and are preparing for a feeding frenzy on the Commissar, ready for the next Marxist to take over. As Alan says, they're already having Stalinist battles about it. Pearce points out that if Corbyn fights the next election, then the Tories will wipe the floor with him. The panel ends the segment answering if they think Brexit will be done by the end of the year. And 3 of them answer yes, while only Piers answers no. Personally, I'm leaning towards agreeing with Piers, which is strange as I've said already. We will still be in the EU at the end of the year, I would expect. Or, possibly worse than that, we would have signed up to the Maybot agreement. Now, I'm going to end the video there, guys. Now, let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Remember to like, subscribe and share the video as it helps the channel a lot. And I'll see you all in the next one.